Howdy, and welcome back to a very special Valentine's episode of the Golden Bough with Dr. Luke. Joining me today are the lovely producer Jordan and our friend Kelly. Welcome, ladies.
Hello, hello.
Thank you. Hello.
We're going to be talking about chapter 34. I said this incorrectly last time because I couldn't get my arrow lined up appropriately, but it's called The Myth and Ritual of Attis, although it was appropriately titled in the YouTube video. This not a lot of material in terms of length, but the import of it is vast. And so this is really part two of what we started last week. I imagine this is going to be at least 3 parts. And it's just the demands of the text. I know we're probably going a little slower than people who follow this religiously. But I feel like I owe it to it. And there have been so many revelations that have occurred here. So before I get into the subjects for today, do either of you want to say something?
I'll just say I'm happy to have been able to join today. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it was a bit of a last minute addition. So I thank you so much for coming in here. Okay, so it's going to be obvious that we're going to be talking about the rites and rituals of Attis and Cybele. It's taking off where we started last week. If you want to get caught up, probably be best to go and watch part 1. But some of the other subjects that will be threaded and woven into our discussion today are the following. You can see them here on the title card. We have a lot to clean up. When we start off today, there will be a lot of the loose ends still from the Adonis, Aphrodite, and Persephone discussion, specifically as it relates to JFK, Jackie, and Marilyn. But some of the other things we're going to be talking about today is the role of prophecy and psychic matters that are occurring simultaneously with the Apollo mission, specifically the prediction by Gene Dixon that JFK would be assassinated in office, and what this means when we have the technological ascent going on with the space race and psychic developments that are happening not only in decentralized individuals, but also coordinated through various think tanks, the United States government itself, through its different psychic research programs. We are going to continue our examination of floral symbolism. Those who've been following along noted that that there are both roses associated with JFK and Maryland, but as far as I know, technically to this date, there's not a special hybrid rose associated with Jackie, which is interesting given that there's like, I don't know, I think we looked it up. I think there's like 30,000 different species of roses, but there is a lily. So I think we want to take that as our cue and think about lily symbolism in regards to Jackie. Also, I can't believe I overlooked this very early on before I even had the proper mythological entities to attach to Jackie when we were looking at her different fashion choices. I don't think we ever discussed her ever-present pearls. Maybe we did. Jordan can jog my memory. I want to take a closer look at pearl symbolism. I think that's going to open up a lot for us. And as strange as it is, the connection to Disney's Pluto and Jackie. That'll be one of our early slides. Last time we discussed a local version of Aphrodite in regards to Jackie. We looked at Aphrodite Melanus, but we did not talk too much about this other version of Aphrodite, Venus Urania, and we'll look at that in regards to Marilyn Monroe. And lastly, I have here on the slide whether or not it's proper to think about the countercultural movements of the 1960s, specifically with like the hippies, as being somehow connected to the cult of Attis Gali, and what that means for us today when everyone is thinking about third genders, pronouns, and the transgender issue. So those are going to be some of the subjects we talked about. I forgot to mention this too. I've got the Hajj up here of Mecca. We'll look at how Cybele and Artemis are associated with meteorites from heaven and whether or not there is a connection to the black zone that is circumambulated at Mecca. So those will be some of the subjects we'll look at.
I love it. And no, I don't think we've covered the pearls before. That will be net
Yeah,
new.
Yeah, I do not know how I missed that earlier.
Yeah, it does seem pretty in your face now.
But yeah,
Yeah.
pretty obvious. Okay. Well, should we get started with the first slide?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I have before we get started here, I didn't include this on the title card because I really didn't want to jump the gun. This was such a powerful discovery. It's usually I share what I've been working on with Jordan throughout the week, but it just didn't work out so much. So hopefully she will be stunned by this. We have a very attentive viewer of the program who I am very grateful for, who's done some boots on the ground research and sent some photos in. Last time we looked at the JFK Dallas Memorial, and I really had a eureka moment because I realized that it's a cenotaph, and a cenotaph is essentially an empty tomb. And this is so important because we've looked at all the dying and rising gods associated with JFK, specifically Christ and Attis. And so if you're going to have a memorial to JFK that's an open tomb, of course, this feeds into that Christic narrative that is in place and the larger theory that we've been looking at about whether or not the spirit of JFK somehow uh, uh, theologically, archetypally, whatever we want to say, seems to have been imbued into the Apollo program itself to create something of a resurrection event. And it becomes so obvious when that snaps into place. Now, Chris, this viewer, took some photos of the memorial for us, and he found that at certain angles of light, of the sunlight, that it actually creates a cross within the JFK Dallas Memorial. And it's just too perfect, right? We've talked about the 72 columns that seem to levitate, and the ones on the corners are symbols for the Apollo rockets themselves, as if the spirit of JFK has done some sort of ascension event here. So it just fits so perfectly. Not to mention that even the X where JFK was assassinated looks on Elm Street looks a bit like a cross, feeding into this whole narrative that we've been looking at. Now, in case anyone was concerned whether or not this was some sort of coincidence, the architect of the memorial, his name's Philip Johnson. There's not a ton of details about what all the symbolism means, but I think it's very appropriate to consider what Johnson is doing with all his memorials, that they are utilizing light as a building element. There are a variety of other projects he's worked on, I think like the Thanksgiving Chapel, where he explicitly draws our attention to light and how it plays a role in the constitution of the project. And here's a quote from him: "Architecture is a game using light to reveal the shapes." And that's a brilliant idea. So I think this cross that is formed by the light hitting a certain way has to be intentional. And I can only, in my mind, though he's never said this anyway, I think it's there for us to discover, and it really unlocks all the intricacies and the details of this project. In my mind, I have this imaginary scenario where he was like showing the model to Jackie and being like, and here is a hidden cross, and one day, 50 years from now, someone may discover it. So Chris and myself have been drilling down on this. I'll pause there, and there's something else I want to communicate about the structure here. But what do you ladies think about this?
Oh, that's amazing. That's such a great
You
insight.
like you like
Yeah,
that?
the shadow and the light. I mean, symbolically, that's super cool. We have come a long way from just saying, "Oh, it's a slab, it's a monolith." It is so much deeper. That's cool.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
dies on the
I
cross,
mean,
like you
I've
said, and then he's
mhm.
resurrected in the tomb.
I've never heard anybody talk about this memorial like we have. It's crazy. I have some more insight on it. Kelly, what do you think? Do you know what we're talking about? This JFK Memorial in Dallas. Had you seen it before?
I hadn't seen it before, but in looking at it and seeing how I wonder how many other structures that are not like monoliths or like ancient structures. I wonder how many other structures have characteristics like this that we haven't picked up on yet.
Oh, I'm sure it's a gate kept, well developed secret strategy amongst architects and engineers that goes back millennia. I mean, I don't think that Philip Johnson is the first person to do this. There are a variety of other ones across the nation, even that do this. But yeah, in that it really does show his indebtedness to the tradition that he's a part of. But if you don't know this, if you don't go and discover these things and fixate on them, it looks like, to be honest, aesthetically, it's a real head scratcher as far as a memorial goes. It looks like a black slab, some like popsicle stick looking fences. It's pretty underwhelming. But as we get deeper into the details, it so much pops into space. It's like it's negative. It's what you don't see, and then your mind fills out the rest to make it come to life. And it really rewards the person who digs into it.
That is good. Thinking about everything as a negative and thinking about reality
Hmm.
itself is that
Yeah.
that is a, I think, Gnostic and perhaps others share that perspective, but that the reality we see is the negative of a more real reality.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to point out about this. I didn't really get to it till this morning, but I know the number 72 is like when you read descriptions of this JFK Dallas Memorial, they make a big deal about, oh, there's 72 columns, and there's like 8 that are, or something like that. I think there's like 7 or 8 that reference the Saturn rockets that went to the moon. Um, the number 72 is a highly esoteric and biblical number. The first place that I thought to go to is Luke 10:1, and it actually describes the greater disciples that are commissioned to carry out the gospel. It says, after this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. And it's was the number 72 just random? No, absolutely not. That is a reference, I believe, back to the Septuagint, where there are tables of the 72 nations. But the number 72 is also very important in uh, mystical Judaism, specifically in regards to the Kabbalah. Uh, so in the Kabbalah, the 72-fold name is so they believe that there's 72 different permutations of the name for God. Okay. So the 72-fold name is highly important to Sefer Raziel Hamalak. It is derived from Exodus 14:19 through 21, read Bostro Donnelly. That means reading it backwards. Okay. I'm sorry. These are not my reading glasses. So let me change them out here. To produce 72 names of 3 letters. This method was explained by Rashi as well as in Sefer HaBahir. Kabbalist legends state that the 72-fold name was used by Moses to cross the Red Sea, and they could grant later holy men the power to cast out demons, heal the sick, prevent natural disasters, and even kill enemies. Obviously, I lifted that from Wikipedia. So, but you can see that there's something very important about this number 72. It's not, at least from an esoteric perspective, random at all. And there's something about, in regards to these 72 names for God, there's also 72 demons that supposedly Solomon had access to, but that's a whole other thing. So I don't know exactly what Johnson was going at here by choosing the number 72. I don't know if he is trying to make all these different, it seems like what would be most consistent with it would be the disciples, like the 72 disciples, perhaps around the empty tomb or something like that. Maybe that's what we're talking about here and feeding more into that Christic, but maybe it's all of them. Maybe they are all, maybe that number 72 is all describing a different aspect of the same thing.
It's super cool. I understand why people are very drawn to study Kabbalah and things like that because it does seem to be a very frequent source of code that gets inserted, even though this is
I never
biblical.
heard this.
Yeah,
I never heard this idea that the 72 names were recited in order to part the Red
yeah,
Sea. That was new information to me.
same.
Like the way it's portrayed in like Sunday school, Moses has his staff and it parts. It's not like there's like this incantation. I don't know if it's even proper to say that. And so, you could possibly, given that there are references to the space program woven into this memorial, you wonder, like, is something similar occurring here when we're talking about breaching the heavens? Is that an analogous event to breaching or parting the Red Sea? So I didn't have time to explore it. I think this is a thread I'd probably to be pulled on later, but pretty interesting if you ask me. Kelly, do you have any thoughts on this before moving on?
No, it was all new to me. I think I'll take a little dive on my own to find those 72 names just for fun.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for introducing that.
Yeah, maybe.
As far as I can tell, I think they're rearrangements of the name Yahweh. I think that's what they are, but I'm not sure.
We shall see.
We shall see. All right, there's another, and I have to attribute this to Chris. He found this. This is amazing. If we can go to the next slide, this is huge. So, in his research, he found that this structure had a lot in common with medieval granaries. See, in these medieval granaries, they would use these stable stones on the corners and whatnot to prop it up. It looks strange. Why would you do this? Well, the reason why they did this is to protect the grain that was stored in these houses. They would prop them up on these columns to make sure that rodents and things like that couldn't get in and ruin the crop. Now, a little pop quiz. Why might it be important to mirror a medieval granary? Let's put on our thinking caps. Let's just say the Dallas Memorial is it did draw inspiration from a medieval granary, right? Why might that be important given what we've studied about Attis and Adonis?
Mm.
Or I
This is
think
not com I mean,
how
we
much
talk about the harvest a lot.
yes, keep going.
Yeah, I mean,
What kind of gods are Adonis and Attis?
vegetable. Yeah,
Yeah, they're vegetative gods that largely happen around harvest
right,
time, right? Is which we've looked at with the whole Thanksgiving, the
right.
timing
Oh,
of the
yes.
assassination with the Thanksgiving.
That's right.
So
Okay.
right, so that's where the whole idea of like sickles and reaping and collecting, etc., whatnot, that go along with. Now, initially, they are more general vegetative
Uh-huh.
gods, right, with the regeneration of all of nature. But over time, we saw they specifically got associated with harvesting. So, and I want to look deeper into this. I mean, I don't think I dwelled enough on it in previous episodes. We're going to have to look at this figure, John Barleycorn,
Mm.
okay, and how it's connected potentially in the northern regions to these rituals that we've looked at in Phrygia and elsewhere. So, I intend to get to it. It'll happen eventually. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about architecture, but I feel like that is a big connection. And so if it truly is something like a medieval granary that is being associated with outer space, given the columns, it's like that granary is actually being turned into a modern launch pad.
That's super interesting. That makes sense. 'Cause
Right.
in all cases,
So
you're harvesting the energy of
yeah,
the consciousness. I don't know, at
exactly.
that time to
Yeah.
fuel
Yeah.
that's pretty much what's going on in all of the fertility rituals that involve the harvest celebrations.
Yeah, I think we have to ask ourselves what does it mean to harvest energy?
Yeah.
What does it mean to practice imitative magic? What is it like what did people actually think they were doing by engaging in these things? Because they felt like they were part of the process. It wasn't just an outward celebration. They felt like they were participants in 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 the happening.
Mhm.
Like that they somehow were effectual in the replenishment of nature and the harvest.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything there, but there's a log cabin right across from the monument, the JFK Memorial. If not right across, very close. called the Neely Cabin.
Mhm.
Nothing's jumping out immediately for me, but I'm curious if anyone else knows what I'm talking about and has any
Yeah.
insight into the symbolic significance in that grid.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the one that you just mentioned, but just from this picture, the columns are so clearly mushroom shaped. And the mushrooms are the ones that are doing the regenerating. They're breaking down the old stuff and growing new stuff, and they're between the grain and the ground. And I just think that's a very interesting point.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a great thing to point out as well, especially when we've looked at the mushroom cloud with the Trinity test and what that might ultimately symbolize as a psychoactive. I will say that a lot of these medieval granaries, I'm not some expert that I've looked at them. This is Chris's photo that he sent to me. They're not all built like this.
Okay.
It's the general principle is that they have these columns. Um,
Just
so
not
I mean, we
just not necessarily mushroom shaped on all of them.
Not necessarily, not
Okay.
necessarily. Some of them are wider, just this particular one
Okay.
to make the point.
Well,
Yeah.
this was a good one to choose for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, let's see here. Sorry, just had to type something. Okay. So now we are going to look at the flower issues. Okay. Jordan, would you mind reading this passage from the hymn to Demeter? Can you see it okay? I know it's
Yeah.
probably small.
Of fair trust Demeter, Demeter, holy goddess, I begin to sing. Of her and her slim ankled daughter, whom Hades snatched away, the gift of wide, beholding Zeus. But Demeter knew it not, she that bears the seasons, the giver of goodly crops. For her daughter was playing with the deep bosomed maidens of Oceanus, and was gathering flowers, roses and crocuses and fair violets in the soft meadow and lilies and hyacinths and the narcissus, which the earth brought forth as a snare to the fair faced maiden, by the counsel of Zeus, and to pleasure the Lord with many guests. Wondrously bloomed the flower, a marvel for all to see, whether deathless god or deathly men. From its root grew forth 100 blossoms, and with its fragrant odor the wide heaven above and the whole earth laughed, and the salt wave of the sea. Then the maiden marveled and stretched forth both her hands to seize the fair plaything. But the wide wade earth gaped in the Nicean plain, and up rushed the prince, the host of many guests, the many named son of Cronos, with his immortal horses. Maugre her will he seized her, and drave her off weeping in his golden chariot, but she shrilled aloud, calling on Father Cronides, the highest gods and the best.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay. So what Jordan just read for us was a synopsis or a brief familiarization to the myth of Persephone and how she is actually abducted and taken into Hades. You can see that there is this fantastic sculpture done. It's called, I'm using the more PG version title of it, called The Abduction of Proserpina by Bernini. But it's interesting that Jackie is so associated with flowers. I think the first things that we think of are the roses in Dallas, and we get deeper into this research. It's roses wherever she goes, primarily like a lot of yellow roses that she gets in Texas, except for Dallas. But the lily being one of her favorites, and how that gets associated with her, even at her funeral. We see this cross that is made out of lilies of the valley, which have attendant symbolism of purity and renewal, which makes sense when you're talking about the transformation of death. But it also calls to mind Persephone and how fitting, right, when she is moving into the afterlife at her funeral, that she would have these lilies placed upon her coffin. So I want to think a little bit deeper about that. Now, this whole Persephone symbolism that is attached to Jackie, I'm not the first one to start to fixate on this. There are biographers of Jackie that have also made this comparison, perhaps not for these reasons, but for others, largely because she transitions from being a certain type of anima figure, a certain type of archetype within society, and ultimately moves to a removed public mourner of her husband's legacy towards the second half of her life. So this is Jackie Under My Skin by Wayne, I believe that says Korstenbaum, and Jay Mulvaney's Diana and Jackie. As far as I can tell, they too, for their own reasons, I've not read these texts. They're pretty accessible. You get cheap copies of them on Amazon. And if someone wants to do that and report back exactly how they make the case that Jackie is a Persephone figure, I'd be curious about that. But of course, I cannot pursue every single research end. We can stay here for a moment, Jordan, if you'd like to comment on the flowers, or if Kelly would like to. But I think we can continue with this Persephone theme into the next slide if you like.
Yeah, I'm good to move forward. We've talked a lot about the flowers symbolically already, but Kelly,
Yeah.
is there anything you'd want to add since you're popping in? Okay.
Oh, you're muted there, Kelly. But I think she said no. We can keep going. I'll let her figure that out. So this I haven't worked it out entirely, but there's also obviously the extension of the Persephone abduction myth by Hades goes further, especially when we start to look at all the different flowers that Jackie was collecting in Dallas in the run up to the assassination. Like I said, everywhere she went, she got bouquets of roses, specifically white and yellow roses, I believe. And then she got the red ones on the day of Dallas, which feeds into the whole Aphrodite and Adonis myth about where red roses even came from. For those who may be joining us for this one, the story goes when Adonis got killed or gored by the boar, she goes running through a rose field and gets pricked by the thorns, and then the roses and the blood and the tears of Adonis and Aphrodite all mixed together, and this is the origin story of the red roses in Greek religion. But you can see, like I mentioned earlier during the title card, that Jackie does not have a rose named after her, unlike JFK and Marilyn Monroe. She has a lily named after her, specifically a day lily. It's called Hemerocallis Jacqueline Kinney Onassis is the name of it. And we could go into what it all means. There's an image of it there in the bottom right-hand corner. It's a very lovely lily. But I think the getting the flowers everywhere definitely has hues of the Persephone abduction story. And when Persephone gets abducted on a black chariot, and I think that is highly significant when we look at the limousine that contained Jackie and JFK that day in Dallas. It seems to kind of slot in and function as that black chariot that is allowing her to be whisked away. And it was at that moment that her life changed forever, and she stopped being one type of anima or archetype figure and became another. So I feel like, of course, not everything is going to work out perfectly, but there's enough there. And I've got some theories I want to talk about later in here. It's like, where does it begin and end? When we may choose certain symbols, we may not know what we're choosing. And then like the archetypal reality like floods in, and then we can kind of play with it, lean into it, step back from it. I don't know if it just completely takes over, you know? So I'll pause there before going deeper into the Hades symbolism.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we've really gone into the details of the lily of the valley specifically as much as we have the rose. But even thinking
Mm-hmm.
about valley as the symbolic, like it's the underworld, right? It's the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely calls to mind. I don't know if the naming etymology has anything to do with this, but when I think valley and I think about all these different archetypal narratives and theological narratives, especially with the Christ imagery, I can't help but think about the valley of death. Now, I don't know if lilies are the valley, and lilies also have other relevancies in the Bible as well. There's a specific passage about not worrying about what will happen tomorrow because God clothes the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. So will he not take care of you in even greater measure? I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but it's one of the it's one of the most beautiful passages, I think, from the New Testament. In fact, Soren Kierkegaard even had a book called The Lilies of the Field based on this. So I'd have to go deeper into it and see what the biblical meaning of the lily is, but I think it has something to do with those two concepts as well. Let's get a mic check on Kelly. How are you doing over there? I think you're still muted. Jordan, should we pause
Yeah,
and help Kelly
sure.
out? Yeah, let's pause for a second. Good enough. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, just the lily of the valley specifically, isn't it toxic?
but just casually researching this, I do believe it does. It has a toxic dimension to it, which is not unlike the
True.
rose too, right? The rose has
True.
its thorn and the lily has its toxicity.
That's true. Both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go a little bit deeper into the concept of Hades, circling Jackie here. And but I don't, in case it's not obvious, I don't know if people, I don't think it's obvious when I do this stuff. I am not positing any sort of conspiracy here. Okay, I have to say this over and over again. I everything that I'm trying to do here is to go beyond conspiracy and look at the merger between divine and profane realms. I ultimately think that there's a super intelligence in control of our reality. So if you want to talk about it being a demiurge or God, I think I'm more comfortable with that. But I do not think that people are orchestrating this in any such way. And I think this is a prime example of that. So let's get into this. In later on in Jackie's life, really not terribly long after the assassination of JFK, she remarries Aristotle Onassis, who was a very close family friend. Okay. And this had been kind of gnawing away at me. But during that marriage, she spent a tremendous amount of time on his private island, Scorpios. Okay. And and that name is just it's been sticking with me. And I was like, what is, I mean, how strange to just have an island called Scorpios. And I did a little bit of digging into it. The reason why it's called Scorpius is because when you look at it from above, it actually looks like a scorpion. And that's how it got its name. I guess this little island that's part of it, I guess considered part of it, looks like the stinger, etc. Right? Now, I did not go deep enough into it. Maybe Jordan wants to do a little Google, and this might prove the point. Although I forgot to do it here. How did they know that it looked like a scorpion from above when they named it? You know, I mean, we didn't get airplanes until the early 20th century. So I'm curious, Jordan, could you look up when the Scorpius Island got its name? And while she's doing that, I'll continue to talk about some other things here. So it is so why is this interesting? It turns out that Scorpio actually rules Pluto, and Pluto is Hades. And like we talked about earlier with the hymn to Demeter, Persephone gets dragged off to Hades. What's interesting about this Jackie being on the Scorpios Island, she pretty much was like cut off from a lot of society at that point. They had a tremendous amount of security. They wouldn't let paparazzi in, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of, in a way, seemed to function as a way where she was cut off from the public persona and reality that she was part of for so long. Jordan, do you by chance have it pulled up here when they were named the Scorpios Island?
I'm still trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Okay, I'll
Okay.
just keep going. Um, what's also interesting when I looked at this this image of Scorpio ruling Pluto, it couldn't help but, I mean, I think I've known this since I was a little boy, since I was 4 or 5 years old, what an uncanny synchronicity you would have to actually have Pluto the dog's visage on the planet Pluto. And it just turns out that both the planet Pluto and the creation of the dog Pluto happened in the same year, 1930. I believe that Pluto the dog came a few months later after the discovery of the planet Pluto. Of course, you could not see the visage of Pluto the dog on Pluto, the planetesimal planet, or whatever it's called now. That was not divulged to us until I think relatively recently. And that would make sense that a dog named Hades would be on the surface of the planet Pluto, because the guard to the underworld is a dog named Cerberus. And here we have a statue of Hades and Cerberus. And because Pluto is a Disney product, it called to mind, if you've ever read Dante, that there are frequent mentions of the city of Dis. And it turns out that Dis is a Roman name for Hades as well. This is from Wikipedia. To ancient Roman mythology, Dis Pater, Father Dis, is the ruler of the underworld. In the sixth book of Virgil's Aeneid, one of the principal influences on Dante in his depiction of hell, the hero Aeneas enters the desolate halls and vacant realm of Dis. So when we talk about going to Disneyland after a superb owl win, right? By the way, Jordan was more accurate with her Super Bowl pick than me. I think it's interesting to think about that symbolism. I didn't think about it seriously until we were conjecturing here last week. But when we talk about going to Disneyland, or even in sort of the truther movement, where we talk about living in a Disneyland Truman Show environment, or we talk about the ever presence of Walt Disney in regards to the space program, like, what are we talking about? Of course, if you look up the name Disney, like in etymology, it's not going to say, oh, this is the city of Dis that's talked about in Virgil and in Dante. But that, the way that I see the reality working, it kind of winks a little bit at you like this. So I found this all to be super fascinating and kind of an endorsement of the idea that Jackie is sort of an embodiment of what I guess I'm calling right now to be a Persephone archetype. What'd you find out about
Well, a
Scorpios,
few
Jordan?
things. So first, let's just talk about topography very briefly. As early as the 1930s, they had aerial photography used in topography. But even before that, we're at least told Lewis and Clark did it by foot. So I don't think it's out of the question that they would have a sense of the shape even before modern
That's true.
airplanes.
That's true.
I couldn't find a specific date on when they named it that. There was no source there. People just said it became popularized and well known because of Onassis. That's when people knew of its name. And then just looking at it, this is, of course, a little bit aerial, but I think from this vantage point, it looks more like a scorpion to me, than the true top down. The true top down for the whole island doesn't look as much like a scorpion to me as kind of how you might see it more if you're coming up to it and getting the impression of it. I don't know what you think.
Cool. Kelly, what did you think about what we talked about here?
Yeah, I can definitely see the scorpion-esque-ness of it. Yeah, I am very curious though of when it got its name, so that might just be a mystery that gets solved at some point, but maybe not right now.
I'm trying to get my AI to give me
Well, it basically okay.
it's playing really dumb
Yeah,
right now.
I just think it's gonna take a little bit more time than 5 minutes.
Well, Google Gemini is telling me that it was. I was like, they're like, oh, we don't really know. I was like, was it 100 years ago or was it thousands of years ago? And Google AI is like, it was closer to thousands of years ago.
Source,
So
please.
yeah, it's
But like I said, topography is
it's
old. It's not. I don't think it has to require airplanes to have a sense of what it looks
yeah,
like.
that's right. They could have done it by foot. Apparently in 1924, they were calling it Scorpios, but if you went back 1,000 years, they were likely using the same name or a very similar medieval Greek
And that's
variation.
in this
So,
area, a lot of the islands are named after kind of their shapes and associated with different mythological symbols. So this is not
mhm,
unique to this island, similar to
yeah.
constellations. But what
Well,
was
oh, something I forgot to mention.
what was interesting to me is
Go ahead.
Onassis essentially terraformed the island. Like he created the beaches on the island. They reforested it. It apparently was very barren when he acquired it, and they have kind of made it what it is today. So talking about all the vegetation, and they brought the vegetation back to the scorpion.
Yeah, they definitely leaned into it. By the way, I forgot to mention this. I looked up at some point, and Jordan is our resident woo girly. Um, Jackie's astrological chart, from what I understand, is like ruled by Pluto. So not only does she like figuratively get drawn to the ruling sign of Pluto, but her chart ruler, I guess she's like a Scorpio rising or a Scorpio ascendant with a Pluto ruler. So this underworld imagery, we've looked at it through her fashion, through the events in Dallas, through a variety of different means, but where she actually lived for a good portion of her life carries that mythological tag as well.
It's interesting. I haven't really looked at her chart. I always have a million questions when you say stuff like that. Like,
Yeah. I
like which system?
this is
Like, what are we talking about?
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, that'd be a whole podcast in
yeah,
and of
there might be
itself.
some out there, but there's quite a few articles kind of talking about it, but I'm not sure what context that is in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go to 727, slide 727, if that's all right. I'm trying to think about how to talk about this. It because there's like logical inconsistency with some of the things that we discuss here. Sometimes we talk about Jackie being an Aphrodite figure. We talk about Marilyn being an Aphrodite figure. We talk about Jackie being Persephone. We talk about her being the Virgin Mary. You know, it's a little bit like nailing Jello to the wall. It's all over the place. But I think we can talk about there being dark and light aspects to the Aphrodite figure, at least while both women are alive. All right. And I don't necessarily really believe that Marilyn Monroe supposedly had this rumored affair with JFK. We're just talking about how it gets communicated through media and how it gets associated with in people's minds. Whether or not it's true or not is less important to the conversation we're having here as we are to this collective hallucination, this collective mythology that we all seem to inhabit, whether or not we choose to be a part of it or we just get propagandized into it. But at least for a time period, you could argue that there are these local variations of the deity Aphrodite that get associated with each woman. You have Marilyn, you could say, is more appropriately called Aphrodite Urania or Venus Urania. Okay, that seems to make sense. But then also you could talk about, like we did last time, that Jackie was the Aphrodite Melanus figure, this local version of the goddess Aphrodite. And then when Marilyn passes away, I think it's possible that the mantle can pass, that these energies, these archetypes or whatnot that were attendant upon one individual can then coalesce around a single one, right? So maybe both of them collapsed, especially when we look at the blood on the roses in the limousine that day in Dallas. We can talk about both Aphrodite figures descending upon Jackie in that moment to recreate the Adonis and Aphrodite death scene. We can also talk about when she gets dragged away in the limo, that the Persephone archetype is descending upon her as well. These things aren't so neat and tidy. They all sort of rush in when the appropriate symbolism is there. So I think that's the way that we can talk about it, is that these energies can possess people at different times, and they can possess them at more than one of them can possess an individual at a time. And it's not necessarily like neat and tidy.
I think that's right. Everything is kind of this blending of these different archetypes, almost in different titration amounts. We're all
Yeah.
containers for different ratios of this alchemical cocktail, and it shifts through our life as well.
Kelly, what say you? I think you might be muted.
How about now?
Oh, you're good.
Okay. I was just doing a little sort of AI dive on Jackie, Marilyn, Princess Di, and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. And I was thinking about how the mantle passes. I don't know if that's something I should bring up right now, but that's where my mind was
Sure,
at
go
as
for
I
it.
was reading that. And I don't really have any theories. I just think it's interesting and worth exploring that they were significant figures and kind of each fit a different archetype. And yeah.
I think it's interesting. We've dipped a little bit into the Michael Jackson figure. And, you know, we looked at last week how Jackie published Michael Jackson's Moonwalk text and how uncanny that is, considering that she was married to the man who launched the Apollo missions. I believe Michael Jackson had, like, it as a child of the 80s. I in the 80s mythology, I associate those two figures together. And of course, Princess Diana has moon symbolism because Diana is Artemis. So I think that you know, I think it's inevitable that we're going to have to address the Princess Diana stuff, especially since, especially since we're talking about all the moon symbols. I just haven't gotten there yet. I will.
One thing, just a little blip for Princess Diana, it says that at her funeral, the sea of flowers, the mounds of flowers at the gates were symbolic votive offerings, and in the Golden Bough, vegetation is often piled high to ensure the return of spring.
It's yeah, for sure. For sure. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. We're going to talk about it. Okay, let's go to the next slide if we can, Jordan. All right, so we are finally going to be able to get into the new Attis and Cybele material for this week, now that we've cleaned up some of the stuff from last week. What do I want to say here? Take a look at the bigger. So it's an interesting question about how Cybele gets into the Roman Empire. In 204 BCE, we have what I guess is known as the Second Punic War crisis. And Hannibal was really wreaking havoc on the Roman army. And I'm not some expert on this. This is just what I've studied up on. And geez, there's so much I need to learn. But something that was left to the Romans were these things called the Sibylline books. And these Sibylline books were given to them by the Chimaean Sibyl, which is kind of a prophetess that is inspired by, get this, Apollo, right? Because Apollo is the god of prophecy. And there's a very interesting story about how the Chimaean Sibyl had written something, I guess, 9 Sibylline texts, and she wanted a certain amount of money, and the emperor was like, no, I'm not doing that. And then she like burned like 6 of them. And he's like, oh, okay, we'll give you whatever you want. And so there were like 3 remaining ones. And what they would do is that whenever they were in periods of crisis, they would consult these books, kind of like a physical Akashic record or like the internet or something like that, to figure out what they should do when faced with an existential threat. And they had their little priest class look at these Sibylline books, and it told them, hey, you need to let this goddess figure, Cybele, to be brought into the gates of Rome. And when that happened, and it was contained in what it was called a black meteorite, right? So they brought this black meteorite in, and they found soon thereafter they had an exceptional harvest, and Hannibal withdrew his forces. And it was installed on the Palatine Hill. And this, over time, the cult was gradually normalized. And this is how it got assimilated into Roman culture. And of course, when I think about this black meteorite, I mean, my first thought was, oh, you mean like the black meteorite that is at Mecca that people venerate and walk around? That sounds really similar. And there are some scholars out there who think that this could have emerged from that story, because apparently there was a moon goddess that was worshipped at the site of Mecca. I believe her name was like Al-Hat or something like that, that was worshipped at Mecca before the establishment of Islam. And like we see in many such cases, like we did when we looked at Our Lady of Guadalupe, there was a local mother goddess figure there that was venerated, and then Juan Diego had the vision and the roses poured out of his cloak, and they established the basilica there. It seems like a lot of these places are able to function as well as they do because it represents an easy transition from the pagan religion to the Abrahamic faith that is now has these figures or these relics part of them. But I'm not gonna, obviously, when we talk, given my interest in outer space, I'm not going to just let the whole black meteorite thing go and be like, that's the end of the story. So we have more to say about that here in a moment. I find this to be highly fascinating. But before I do want to bring it to the next slide, Jordan, on 729. I do want to talk about briefly the meteorite thing is really not too far away from other stones that are venerated. And this gets back into Jackie wearing pearls. I don't know if you call pearl a stone, but it's a hard calcified material, obviously produced in oysters and whatnot. I wanted to just bring this to our attention. This is a crazy photo. When we start thinking about Jackie associating herself with ISIS, and of course that would make JFK Osiris, and then we got JFK Jr. here. Naturally, you have to ask yourself, when he's like chewing on the pearls here of Jackie, is he some sort of Horus figure? But the pearls are symbols of all different types of goddess figures. We've got it with Venus and Aphrodite, Diana and Artemis, the Virgin Mary. That was a little bit of a surprise to me. And of course, Ishtar and Astarte, but others. And they mean something a little bit different. For Venus, she's born from the sea foam. The pearls were said to be the solidified drops of water or tears of joy that fell from her skin as she emerged from the sea. Diana, linked to the moon's lunar cycle and white luster, represented the purity and cool detachment of the virgin huntress. So even the pearls themselves contain a reference to the moon, right? That makes perfect sense. And of course, Jackie, who's married to the man who sends us to the moon, is going to be draped in these all the time. And as far as the Virgin Mary goes, I think it has something to do with her sinlessness and her spiritual wealth. Now, are these all the primary symbols of these different goddess figures? We can have that debate, but they are all associated in some way. So I just wanted to do that little sidebar there, and how fascinating that is, and what this, I think the average person looks at this picture and goes, oh, no big deal. Like, it's just a family photo. And it's like the JFK Dallas Memorial. It's what you don't see. Right. And as we're having our conceptual framework here, it's like putting on meta glasses, but not actually wearing the meta glasses. It's like granting access to a holographic layer of reality that you can't see with normal eyes.
Good thing we have these super high tech glasses today.
Yeah. You can see them with the Valentines. I guess this is what Kubrick put on Lolita as well. So Osik would say, why have you not mentioned Kubrick here? Yeah.
Pearls are very multidimensional in their symbolism. I always think of the pearly gates when I hear pearl.
Yep.
So we have sort of an
Yeah.
afterlife situation there. Of
Yeah,
course,
for
they're
sure.
forged in the depths of the ocean, which kind of
Yep.
mirrors, we talk about the moon being related to the oceans. Really, no matter how you want to slice reality, if you want to go just normal interpretation, oh, the moon rules the waves. But there's some other water synchronicities with the moon as well. Yeah, there's a lot there.
But I think even with her wearing these pearls, you can see how all these different archetypes are kind of hovering around
Hmm.
her. And if this was like a one-off thing, I wouldn't be making such a big deal about it. But we've seen so much of this, and some of it is by her choosing. I think it raises a very interesting question. At what point did she become conscious that she was destined to play this role? Because at the deeper we've gone into this research, this was a highly educated woman with access to a lot of the material that we've been looking at. Something we looked at last week during her publishing years. She published Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth, which was indirectly inspired by Frazer's The Golden Bough through Young. So at some point, I think Jackie must have had this realization, being like, I think I am replaying this role in world history. I mean, how could she? We looked at this when she saved the Isis temple of Dindur that got relocated to the Met. It's endless. I think at some point she knew. And that's not to say that there was a conspiracy. That's to say, like, she may have been in touch with a deeper layer of reality.
Yeah, well, just recognizing one's own fate and even the comedy of one's own life with all these things clicking into place. I don't know how where she was or not, but it is hard for me to imagine that she would never have had a contemplative moment about how all of these themes that she's publishing are relevant in her own life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool. So I have no problem with this. I mean, it certainly makes reality much more exciting. Kelly, what do you think about this?
Well, I think that the symbology of the pearl is interesting in the aspect of alchemy because it's the only gem that's born from a living injury. So it's like it
Yes.
transmutes that injury, alchemizes it into the pearl.
Yeah, that's a fascinating insight.
It's
Yeah,
harvested through a sacrifice.
that's true too.
I'm
That's
just saying what
very
Kelly said.
true.
It's Kelly's insight.
No, I hadn't even thought about it. That's very true. Right. There's, yeah, I mean, especially when we're talking about the ultimate ambition of the Kennedy administration, at least in the mythopoetic understanding of reality, is that we're ultimately after the moon, right? And to get pearls, you have to crack open and kill oysters, right? So why should it be any different that if we want to achieve this goal of the alchemical marriage of the solar figure Apollo landing on the feminine lunar surface to create, I guess, what I've postulated to be the Philosopher's Stone? Why shouldn't it be any difference that we're not going to require some sort of sacrifice for this?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, JFK, his whole presidency is defined by sacrifice. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It's like there in I believe he said that in his inaugural speech. And it's like that, it definitely causes things to take on a completely different hue. Okay. Shall we go to the next slide? You're muted.
Do you want to take a short break? Okay.
Yeah, let's take a break. Okay, I think we've covered everything that I wanted to say about the Pearl thing. Does anybody else have any parting thoughts?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, let's talk more about meteorites.
Are they moon rocks?
Well, we're going to get to that. We're going
That's
to get
where
to that. It certainly it certainly casts the whole moon rock thing in a different light. Okay. Geez, we're going to get to it eventually. I got so many digressions here. Okay. So I mentioned Jean Dixon in the intro to this podcast, and we've talked about her. She's come up several different times during the course of this conversation about the JFK assassination, but she hit in a major way on the assassination of JFK. She made the prediction back in 1956. It is her most notable hit, but then she missed a bunch, and I've got them all sort of outlined here. But despite that, because she was so successful with that 1956 prediction of JFK, you can go back there. You actually, it's out there on the internet. You can read where she made the prediction in 1956. That she actually got to meet with Nixon and talk to him about visions of the future. She was involved with Nancy Reagan, et cetera, et cetera. But it got me thinking about, as much as we've looked at the Apollo program, I've been like, well, where's, when we've looked at Apollo being the god of all these different things, we've looked at it in terms of this god of pestilence and thinking about all the quarantine measures that were involved in the moon missions. We looked at the elements of music, Apollo being this god of music, but we haven't really been able to nail down the god of prophecy aspect of it, outside of there seeming to be some element of science fiction that perfectly anticipates the Apollo program. Specifically, individuals like Jules Verne and Orson Welles get major aspects of the moon missions correct, in 80 years in advance. So what are we talking about? I do have a little, Jordan, I don't know if you can read that there, this line from Virgil's Aeneid.
Sure. In these words, the Cumaean Sibyl chants from the shrine her dead enigmas and booms from the cavern, wrapping truth in darkness. So does Apollo shake his reins as she rages and ply the goad beneath her breast.
Right. I thought that was a very important statement. And the reason why is that it portrays the god Apollo as being this force. I don't know what we want. We talk about it as an archetype, a psychic force that tends to like shake humanity, rattle humanity in such a way to make his presence known. And so when you start to see these, I don't think Jean Dixon was the only psychic at this time who was having pretty massive hits. There were others that I'm not familiar with. I think that's an interesting exploration in and of itself. But it should make sense that we have other psychic activity paralleling the outer space program and the Apollo missions, and we do have that. If we progress to the next slide, if you don't mind, Jordan. I might be a little bit out of order, but let's.
I can go forward and back.
Talking about no, you're good. What I want to say here is that as far as the Cumaean Sibyl goes in regards to the chapter on Attis and Cybele, one of the interesting things that was talked about in the chapter, or in my further research, is that some of the Cumaean Sibyls were actually appropriated by early Christianity when they turned to these Sibylline texts that Frazer speaks of quite condescendingly. He talks about them being like this source of nonsense. Some of the early Christian fathers turned to the Sibylline text, or whatever was left of them. From what I understand, there are fragments that we don't really have good copies of them or anything like that, but that there were certain passages of the Sibylline text that were interpreted as an enunciations of the imminence of the Savior. That even in these pagan channeled writings, there were whispers and fingerprints of the coming Christ, which I found to be really interesting, which kind of goes into this whole idea I've talked about earlier. It's not really a problem for me that the dying and rising God cycle appears all over the world in our remote past, because it all could have been preparation for the pagan mind for the culmination and the true dying and rising God to come forward. So I don't really have a problem with this if I kind of adopt sort of an emergent, perhaps Hegelian understanding of religion. So I thought that was interesting. There are some others that I think there was one. There's this rumor claimed only a king could defeat the Parthian Empire, and this some way inspired the conspiracy to end Julius Caesar. But if we can go to the next slide, Jordan. Actually, let's stay on this one more second. Look at going off of what I said about the role of the Cumaean Sibyls in early Christianity. Michelangelo actually painted the Sibyls on the top of there are 5 different ones, but we're only going to be focusing here on the Cumaean Sibyl, and that's what's featured here. They're all on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Look at that Cumaean Sibyl. What do you see? Just trust your eyes. Describe what sex are the Sibyls?
They appear to be male.
In this case, right? But in the historical record communicates to us that they are females, right? That pretty much the prophecies emanate from female sources, whether it's the Delphic Oracle or these Sibyls. That women are the ones that are in touch with the future. Okay, but Michelangelo has portrayed the Cumaean Sibyl here as this hyper masculine bodybuilder. Okay. Now, why might he do that? The theories are that given the weight of the prophecy, okay, that was contained in these Sibylline texts, given the weight of them, the only way that he could communicate the gravitas, the responsibility, and all of that was to make the Sibyls more masculine, to actually make them hyper masculine. I mean, this Sibyl here can like compete for Mr. Universe.
Yeah.
And apparently, like the way she is tilting her head, some people have speculated that she's like hearing the prophecy from Apollo, like that it's catching her or something like that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah. Why do we have our female prophetesses portrayed this way?
Well,
I don't know. Perhaps to convey the magnitude of or the strength. Interesting.
Yeah, I find it interesting that the magnitude and the strength that it requires to be a Sibyl can only be portrayed through the hyper masculinization of the female body. See, it wouldn't be obvious to me that that's what this is communicating. And perhaps I disagree with Michelangelo on this. I mean, it's not necessarily from what I know how I would choose to represent this.
Yeah, I almost think there's something else happening, but I
think that's probably the case. I don't know what it is.
I'm not initiated yet.
I mean, yeah. So maybe there's an element of hermaphrodism that we don't understand yet. I mean, I'm not some expert.
That's where my mind kind of went, because it, like, obviously the figures in the back are very male. The larger there's almost more of a bosom. So I don't know what's happening here. There's a lot with androgyny and gender bending and gender inversion within alchemy. So I don't know. What's more peculiar to me is all of this is on the ceiling of a supposedly Catholic pilgrimage site.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
I mean, look, it's not like the main focus. You have to know what you're looking for.
Well, but there's a lot of, I would say, non-biblical imagery on that ceiling, not just this.
Yeah. Well, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but yeah. I mean, I think this is going to get into where the Vatican was established. I haven't had a chance to coherently put it together, but I think like we've looked at the sites of everything else,
Mhm.
right? Like we've looked at the Dallas site and the Trinity site and the Apollo sites. I imagine this is inevitably, even before we get done with this chapter, going to require us to think about why the Vatican was built where it was, perhaps for these archetypal
Yeah.
reasons. And if we've looked at all the like the Basilica of Guadalupe and Mecca, if they had these mother goddesses there, I suspect that that narrative is going to be relevant. I don't know. I'm not a Catholic. I don't know this. I have to educate myself on this ancient history as I go, but I suspect something unusual happened at that site, but I don't know.
It is interesting that these are all like goddess sites. It makes me curious. Is this one world religion still a goddess worship situation, but not obvious to outsiders looking in because of so much female oppression that has occurred, at least outwardly? Or is it like a shifting away from goddess worship into male worship? I'm intrigued, is what I will say. And
Yeah.
the more I read, the more
Yeah.
intrigued I am, because it's
Yeah.
weirder than I could have imagined.
Well, it's almost like goddess worship is the default setting.
Right.
That's the most natural um conclusion, and that at least the Abrahamic religions positing a father god seems to be um against
That's
that.
the
Now,
argument
that
of some of
raises
the
a
rationalists. You talk about the religious rationalists, especially in the German intellectual tradition. A lot of them talk about the sun being natural worship because it's life-giving, it biologically and scientifically makes the most sense. I think you could stretch that to include the feminine because that's what you come out of. So
well, yeah, what I would say there is that the sun worship is part of mother worship, as we've
I
seen with
see.
yeah. So as we see with Attis and Cybele, right? So all right, let's make some progress. Let's keep talking about psychic powers for a little bit, and we're going to get back around to meteorites, I swear. So if Apollo is the god of prophecy, and like the quote from the Aeneid is applicable, where this archetypal energy, this pagan god Apollo, whatever we're talking about, is actually able to rouse the spirit of prophecy up into the population, it shouldn't surprise us that as the outer space exploration was going on, that we see all the government getting involved in programs involving psychic powers, specifically astral projection, creating the MK Ultra projects, create splitting of personalities, hacking the mind. I've got it all laid out here, like the ones that we know about, the Stargate program, et cetera, et cetera. It's like as we're exploring outer space, it's almost like just as much, arguably more, if you understand what outer space really is going into the exploration of inner space. That these two projects are happening concurrently. And that makes, if we expand what we mean by Apollo being the god of prophecy, it shouldn't shock us that um, that we're seeing these two things happen around the same time period. And that gets into then I put on my thinking cap. I'm like, okay, like we're having all this technological mastery of outer space as we're exploring the human mind in ways that we have not fully gripped in 2026. Both the technological mastery and the exploration of the inner space seem to coagulate around the pursuit of the development of the internet. Like a lot of the hardware and stuff like that was involved in the Apollo missions gets repackaged for a different purpose through ARPA and DARPA for the internet. And then what is the internet? And I sit on Twitter like hours every day, and there are people who are like, look, we are literally in touch with the collective unconscious by being on this particular platform. And there's enough schizos that I follow who actually think they're like reshaping reality as a result of participating in that. And I wonder if somehow the technological and the inner space explorations merged at some point, and that the internet is somehow a synthesis of these two Apollonian pursuits. of prophecy and technological mastery,
That makes a
and how it's ultimately setting up the singularity and setting up our subsumption into it.
yeah, of course. The more you dig into transhumanism, the more obvious it is. This is magic. This is not some net new concept. In fact, I think the technology is the expression of an underlying ideology and underlying perspective that you can trace back to Babylon, not some happy accident and now we have technology so now we're talking about these things. When we get into modeling and the obsession with tokenizing everything and getting everything tracked so it can be managed, so it can be predicted, that certainly feels like trying to create a world where prophecy is just at people's fingertips.
Yeah. Well, like, what are we doing right now? Right? Like, people joke about this. Like, we have these like scrying
Mhm.
mirrors, right? That we're holding up to our faces and like able to are people joke about this. Oh, you can't talk about it this way. Are we astrally projecting? Have we astrally projected Kelly into this conversation?
Well, here's a question too. Do you feel like you're in your body when you're online? It is very
I and you've seen this happen with me. I mean, I don't even care about looking crazy anymore. I've been vindicated on enough things, and
I
enough
was just
people
getting
experience these
sleepy
things
with
too.
the red.
Oh, that's okay. No, it's the glare is hurting my eyes. But what I would say is this gets into and I have a reference to this in a slide coming up. Is this gets into the noosphere and Desjardins' work, but I oftentimes I do, as far as I know, I've not taken any sort of like implant or neural link or anything like that. But I do feel that um, media has become an extension of me, that I have merged with it to some extent. I was before we even got on here, and I don't know how it works. I don't even know I've been logging all the different synchronicities. We watched the Gilmore Girls, and what we talk about here ends up in the show. I mean, 2 nights ago, the Pieta made an appearance, and the past 2 podcasts we've spent, I don't know, 25% of the time just talking about Michelangelo's Pieta, and it suddenly shows up in Gilmore Girls, an episode from like 2007. So, you know, what is happening here? Have we already created our own digital simulacra or simulacrum, and like we're something's outside of it, playing with it and recalibrating it. And when we are in this thing, doing what we're doing right now, like, is the spirit of Apollo like possessing us in some way? So who knows? What do I know? I don't know
I have a lot
anything.
to say on that topic, but um
Yeah, go for it.
it seems to me there is a we're going to use real loosely. There is a foundational simulacra, if you will, that we are in that requires no technology to access beyond, if you want to call the human body technology, that's technology, but it doesn't require a computer, a screen. It doesn't require a neural link to access it. We are naturally able to access it. I think that exists. And we are seeing the creation of a simulacra within the simulacra that is easier to control, that we also are all webbed into. And that's what I think you see being pushed with the vacations, with the just 24/7 access to media. And the media is programming us. And I think something that people are not very aware of often, or at least when I bring it up, people are surprised. Even the flicker rates of the light is impacting us and programming us. So it's not always consciously noticeable. But unlike the sun, which I mean, the sun is complex. I'm not trying to minimize it. There's a lot happening and shifting and changing every moment with the sun. But when we're talking about our devices, they are flashing at us in a way that isn't consciously perceivable. and is entering our retinas and programming our brains. So it's weird. It's weird. And they use this is a known technology for therapy. So it's well established that this has an impact on the human, but we don't really talk about its impact all the time outside of a clinical therapeutical setting. So I just think it's very fascinating, Luke. Like you said, we are totally immersed in it, but even when we get out of it, even when we just go to nature, which is the ultimate, the base, the more true simulacra, we're still going to find ourselves, I think, in conversation with our higher selves, with God, with life, even outside of the technology. But what's troubling about the technology sphere is, yes, we're participating. It's this feedback loop, and talking about prophecy and talking about divination and the ability to predict things. Well, the thing that is the least predictable is God. The thing that is the least predictable is true life force energy. But if they can keep everyone in the cell that is the scrying machine, they can predict you a lot better because you're operating within their universe and you have kind of a finite set of choices within that. So it makes
Well, I think all of this is very productive. I think, honest to God, I really want to look at Bough's work for us, even to get down the distinctions between simulation and simulacrum, because I doubt I'm using them accurately. I think a simulation is kind of like this digital environment or this fake reality like Disneyland or Truman Show, and a simulacrum is like a sign divorced from its original context. But regardless, I think we have to revisit what it means for something to be real or fake and what is technology, because I'm not convinced that nature is not technology. I have no problem with thinking about the creator as being the head of the simulation. And so it becomes simulations within simulations. If we talk about what humans are trying to create, I think it's an interesting question. Is it shielding them from the larger creator simulation, or is it hacking into it, if it can be hacked at all?
I agree with your framing there a lot. I'm using these terms really loosely right now and very casually. Yeah.
Well, let me toss and turn about the criticism I'm going to get for that. But one day I'll get to it. One day I will get to it. Kel, do you want to weigh in on this before we proceed?
No, I'm good. That was a
Yeah, it's a
lot.
lot.
That's yeah, it's definitely a lot of food for thought. So
It is. Okay, what do we have next, Jordan?
I think you more or less talked about this, but more details.
Yeah, I think I talked about it. I think we've danced around this a little bit about the evolution of these two tiers of the psychic and the technological mastery, ultimately somehow leading to the singularity. I think we need to look at Pierre Teilhard de Chardin more closely. I'm just going to spotlight. That's the I believe he's a Jesuit priest down here on the bottom who wrote years ago. I read The Phenomenon of Man and Future of Man. And at the time, my impression was these are the best written books I've ever disagreed with. Phenomenal stylist and writer. Probably going to have to revisit that in light of everything that I've learned since then. Because my views are shifting.
Did you read this more when in your philosophy era?
No, I read this. I don't know how to describe this. This is transition from like startup to crazy truther era. I went to I had a friend who was selling a home, and there was like a stack of books in the attic, and she was like, I can think of only one person who would want these, and that's how I ended up with them. So I felt obligated to read them at that point. Okay, since I think we've largely covered this idea, let's save a little time and go. All right, so now we're finally back to meteorites. Okay, what do I want to say about this? As I'm putting on my Lolita glasses to try to read it. So we talked about with the Sibylline books were interpreted by the priests to bring the black meteorite into the gates. in order to repel Hannibal and to increase the harvest. When we look at these other mother goddesses, we're going to find that they too are associated with something that is like a black meteorite. Now, the cult of Cybele, she's not explicitly a lunar goddess, but there are lunar symbols that are associated with her. Most specifically, we looked at her drum, right? That she whips people up into this frenzy, specifically the Gali that then do the day of mourning or the day of blood ritual, right? Where they castrate themselves. And I felt like that had a lot of similarities. So Woodstock and the countercultural movement. But also with the veneration of these black rocks really struck me as reminiscent of the veneration of the moon rocks. I'm old enough to remember when like moon rocks were like passed around to schools and institutions, like they were like a holy relic. They were still kind of making the rounds in the early mid 80s. Perhaps Kelly remembers this as well. I don't know if they reached up into Canada, and it generated a lot of interest in the space shuttle program, and a lot of kids were going to space camp and things like that. It was like ooh and ah. It was like a holy object. And you see here's an example of Nixon giving a moon rock away, and they gave these to, they had these delegations all over the world that they used to bestow to other countries the booty that we rescued from the moon. And I think that this has a lot of similarities to how that black stone was treated. I mean, even the fact of how the quarantine measures sound very similar to how the Sibylline, I guess it's called a Betel. They also have them for Aphrodite and other goddesses. Like at the end of the Hilaria festival, they would throw this image into the water. It's really not unlike the decontamination process that they use for the specimens that they got back from the moon. All right. And I think we can go, like with Cybele, it fell from heaven, right? It is a sky stone. These moon rocks are sky stones. The meteorite that's at Mecca is a sky stone. And I want to look, if we can go to the next slide. This is everywhere in the ancient world. So we have it with Cybele, we have the black meteorite, and then we also have it with Artemis. Now this is super fascinating, not only because we have the Artemis mission that keeps getting delayed, which I've just looking at the symbolism, I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's too much negative symbolism surrounding it for a variety of reasons. But this rock or this image that was associated with Artemis is actually mentioned in the Bible. And I guess the idea is that Artemis, the cult of Artemis, came from a similar source as the Cybele cult. So Jordan, if you could read that passage from the book of Acts for us.
And when the town clerk had appeased the people, he said, Ye men of Ephesus, what man is there that knoweth not how that the city of the Ephesians is a worshipper of the great goddess Diana, and of the image which fell down from Jupiter?
Right. So yeah, the image fell down from Jupiter, and it's and not to be too much of a school marm, it's Ephesus, but it is a very strange word to come across. And you can see here with Artemis of Ephesus that she had very prominent symbols associated with her, such as the crescent moon and the bee. Now, those images are also going to end up being associated with the Virgin Mary. It turns out, and I'm not some great expert on this, but this cult of Artemis or Diana was obviously, because it's recorded in the book of Acts, was very well known to the originators of Christianity. So in 431 AD, they conveyed a council of Ephesus. And at the council of Ephesus, this is the moment where it was actually decided that the Virgin Mary was the God bearer and the divine mother. That was the outcome of this. And I think, and we've looked at even very early on, we've looked at all the lunar symbolism associated with the Virgin Mary. I think it started with looking at the Revelation 12 with the woman who's standing on the moon. But there is this phenomenon of these black Madonnas, right? I've got here one pictured on the screen here. And so it would make sense if they were worshiping these stones, these black meteorites, these images that fell down from Jupiter, it would make sense that there would be this synchronization that would occur where the Black Madonnas would be like figures of the Virgin Mary and the Christ child made out of similar looking stones, is a way, like we've seen everywhere else, to assimilate the native population into the early church. Just as we saw how the Catholic Church was able to flip Mexico from the Aztec religion to the Catholic religion through the Mary of Guadalupe, we might have had, this might have been something that was just a standard practice very early on in Christianity. I'm not saying this completely explains why there are Black Madonnas, but it certainly makes some sense, especially when you look at all the lunar imagery associated with Mary in the book of Revelation and elsewhere.
For sure. Yeah.
I think this is a big deal.
I did
I've
too.
seen these Black
Yeah.
Madonnas ever since I was a little kid. I was like, when I was a little kid, I was like, oh, wait, why is that's the Virgin Mary, right? But why is she black? Like it, I didn't have, I was, but I wasn't Catholic, so I kind of let it go. But, and I'm sure I'm sure there might be someone who's Catholic watching, be like, no, that's not why. You're a bad person for even saying it. I mean, look, you have your counsel about the Theotokos. I don't know if that's how you say it. Theotokos. I don't speak Greek. Okay. You have this in Ephesus. I mean, people presumably knew about the cult of Artemis there and her image that fell out of heaven or fell from Jupiter. Perhaps interesting as well that Artemis has the bee symbolism that we've looked about, that like with Buzz Aldrin, right? Bzz, right? Like that we have the bee on the moon, nature's natural alchemist, right? I've even seen things where like some of the angels in the iconography of Mary, like there was this great debate about how large angels are, right? If they're enormous or they're small, how many angels could dance on the head of a pen? I think there's some conversation about whether or not bees are interchangeable symbolisms or symbols with angels, little angels.
Oh, that's it. I've never considered that.
Yeah, which then gets into the whole white space suit and ascending the ladder, like Jacob's ladder.
When you start thinking about free will as well and how they operate, that makes some sense to me.
Go on,
Well,
tell me more.
presumably angels are more tied to their code in a way that humans have more agency to deviate from.
Well, I think that's an interesting angelology
It is.
conversation about how much free will angels have, because ultimately they do have some free
Right.
will because a third of them
I
rebelled.
yes, point well taken. Yes. But also they are different from humans. At least that's what the literature
Oh, for
says
sure.
in terms of what they are capable of doing.
I think it would be harder for an angel to rebel. I don't know if they're constrained to do so, but like when you are so close to God and you so intimately know the plan, I think it becomes incredibly stupid to try to subvert it. Whereas perhaps humans you could blame more on ignorance and just being low IQ and dumb. I don't I don't know if angels could have, for angels it would have to be totally located in like pride if they could have
Maybe.
it.
And ambition.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, I would never accuse Lucifer of lacking ambition.
Kelly, should do you want to say anything before we go to the next one?
No, I'm going to be thinking further on the symbolism of the bee. That piqued my interest quite a bit, so I'm gonna take that on.
Yeah. In case, I mean, I came to the conclusion that they are nature's alchemists, right? Because ultimately they take the raw material of pollen and transform it into golden honey, right? Like this is the idea. The alchemists want to turn lead into gold, right? So the honey becomes a symbol of the great work.
And isn't there something about their wings too that they don't fly in the regular way they fly? The mechanism that allows them to fly is not really wings, as in like as if birds or whatever. And I think that's interesting too because it just puts a different spin on their process.
Yeah, it definitely does. And this is something I've not explored. I want to, but we were watching Begonia not too long ago, and I obviously had been thinking about this Buzz and bee and alchemy symbolism with the moon. Not to mention that Buzz's mother's name was Marion Moon, Mary on Moon, right? Which clearly invokes Revelation 12, Mary standing on the moon. But the what are they? The beekeeper suits. The beekeeper suits look like astronaut suits.
Yes, they
And
do.
so I think that is part of this riddle as well.
Yeah, I think so. Bees are important. Begonia was very
Very
good.
important. Yeah, it was. It's a flat Earth
Yeah.
movie. Okay. Next slide. Okay. This is just an attempt to get some terminology. And I ran this by Jordan earlier in the week. She didn't particularly care for it, but you know, I think what happens, and I really want to disentangle myself from all this confusion because I think when people like watch this stuff, they go, "Oh man, this is like some schizo conspiracy theory stuff," and it's schizo. I'm not going to deny that, but reality is schizo. I can't help it that everything's connected. It is. I can't blind myself to that. But to think that it's complete top down conspiracy technocratic control, I do not think works. There are so many different examples that we have come across here. I mean, look, the Scorpios Island. Do I think Jackie O's like, oh yeah, I want to end up with a Greek man who lives on a scorpion island so I can fulfill the archetypal fate of Persephone? No, I do not think that happened. I think I don't even know, perhaps she realized it at some point that this was happening, but I don't think she was allowing something like that to make a decision for herself or that someone else was plotting out her life. Some human was plotting out her life in that way. So I don't think the technocratic top down theory really works. And when we've looked at people like Hoffman and Downer, that's kind of their MO. They think there are secret societies who are doing all this stuff. I'm not naive to think that it's complete archetypal necessity, that there aren't individuals that perhaps can become conscious of this and lean into it. This has been a conversation that we've been having since the very beginning. That it's just completely archetypal emergence because we have seen enough esoteric elements that seem to be intentionally signaled that we can't deny that as well. And so I think that the working terminology for the hybrid view is mythic technological convergence. I came up with this with the Google Gemini AI. I don't know if Jordan likes this or not, but essentially the idea that whether we know it or not, when we make certain sort of technological or historical moves, it cracks open fissures between these two realities and allows archetypes to flood in. And perhaps we can talk about how much control or how much we can intentionally interact with it. But I think that this, in a way, explains some of the 20th century alchemy that we've been looking at. So that's the term that I'm giving it. I did have the AI create an image to perhaps capture this. Jordan, if you can go to the next slide. Oh, is that the next slide?
It should be now.
It should be. Okay. Right. So I think this in some way captures more of what we're looking at here. Specifically there on the far right. I know, like, on the far left here, we have like very like this is like, I think this is where like a lot of a conspiracy culture is, like the people that wear the Guy Fawkes masks and think it's all like elites that are meeting at Davos or something. I think that's what they think is going on here. I look at a lot of the so-called elites. I don't really think they're that well versed in a lot of the subjects that we're talking about here. And I think on the far right is more of what we're looking into here. Like, we have the rocket um, from the space program taking on or being transformed into something like the tree of life. I don't think the individuals know what they're doing, but it's going to impose itself despite their ignorance. Now, I think that there's a lot of development that still has to happen here, but that's kind of where I'm leaning right now. Mythic technological convergence.
Yeah, these images are awesome, and thanks for throwing me under the bus.
I'm not. How did I throw you under the bus? I'm not trying to.
When you first shared the term, I wasn't thinking of it as narrowly as technology being the mechanism for bringing through the mythic,
Mm-hmm.
but I get what. Anyway, I don't know. I don't know. Yes.
I wasn't
Yeah.
trying to throw you under the bus. I was just feel free to defend yourself here. I didn't mean to portray it
Oh
incorrectly.
no, that's okay. I just yeah.
Oh,
No,
boy, I'm in
you're
trouble.
not. No, I'm just saying, like, I'm not trying to poo-poo it. Like, I'm not trying to just be like, oh, it's terrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like there could be it really depends on how we're describing technology. And in my mind, that term feels like a slice of this bigger concept of
Yeah.
like the concepts, the umbrella concept of we are maybe sometimes knowing unknowing participants in this bigger sympathetic magic that's happening where we're basically creating the circumstances for the mythic to flow through, but also the primordial myth is perhaps influencing. I think we kind of have to step out of cause and effect, to be honest. That's how I'm describing this, but I'm not sure
Yeah.
that's really what's happening. But there's this, like you said, I think convergence is maybe a good word for it. At first, when I heard techno mythic convergence, my mind was going to the singularity, and perhaps it is a singularity in a way, but I do think it's distinct from uh, merging with like technology, all like Peter Thiel, right? Like that's a very
Yeah.
particular flavor that I think may be a little bit different, but could be encompassed by what we're talking about.
Well, there's a tandem corollary that I sort of developed with this too. I mean, like I said, I'm not prepared to defend these in their entirety. I mean, a lot of what we do here is a workshop. So if anyone wants to come for me, like intellectually, like, I understand I'm making mistakes all over the place. This is not a final theory. So I'm not saying that this is the way it is. These are some of the frameworks and some of the vocabulary I think we need to have in place to even begin to describe the phenomenon that's happening. So,
But I love this imagery of the rocket with the tree, and it also looks like the DNA, and
yeah,
you have the
yeah,
planes. This is super cool.
yeah. Well, it was funny. I didn't even intend to have AI generate this. I just said, hey, because I was like doing 5 different tasks at once. Can you pull up an image that would be
Yeah.
appropriate for the slide? And it was like, oh, I'll just make one. And I was like, isn't this a little advanced for you?
Yeah, this
So
turned out pretty compelling. I like it.
yeah, I think so too. Kelly, you want to weigh in before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, if you could you pop back to the previous slide just for a second? So I feel like I'm leaning more towards, I mean, at this point in time, the number two, where it says
Mm-hmm.
the core philosophy is humans are vessels for recurring ancient scripts that we cannot help but act out. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's where I'm leaning
Yeah.
right now. But I think they're all very interesting. And yeah, because I mean, like, sometimes don't we all find ourselves like doing things and we're like, why did I just do that? Or
Yeah.
why did I say that? Or why did I go there?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's where I'm leaning
I
right
mean,
now.
I was talking to somebody earlier this week about the compulsion of the name phenomenon. Okay. And we're just going to call them someone. Okay. I was talking to someone about the compulsion of the name phenomenon, about how our destiny seems to be baked in to our names. And to kind of prove the point, shortly after I said that, I got back on the computer, and James Vanderbeek died this past week from Dawson's Creek. Now there's this whole riddle going on with like Kathleen O'Hara died and she was on Schitt's Creek, and then Dawson from Dawson's Creek died, and there's like the Potomac is filled with sewage right now. There's this weird little fractal that's going on with bodies of water that are happening. But James Vanderbeek's name, Vanderbeek, means of the creek, right? And then his most iconic role, I mean, as far as I know him, would be to play a man named Dawson, like that's associated with the creek. So uh, I would say that is evidence that counts in favor of humans are vessels for the archetypal reality.
Yeah, and then the whole Potomac layer added on top of it right now is weird.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure both O'Hara and or what's his name, James Vanderbeek, I think they're both passive colorectal
Yeah,
cancer. So that that feeds into this as
there's
well.
sewage leaking into the Potomac.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. We don't need to go too far into it, but yeah, I think at least his name, I think, is probably an example of archetypal emergence or breakthrough or bleed or whatever we want to call it. So,
Seems so.
yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this corollary I was working with AI on. By the way, we have like a half hour. So we might be able to get through everything today. So something I was thinking about was, it this, when looking back at the killing of the king ritual, like, why is this done? Why is the god killed and why it rises again? A lot of the time it's done to I guess harvest the essence and have it return to the mother so that there can be this cyclical renewal of the harvest and of the surrounding vegetation. Or you can see that the leader, the king, is in the fullness and apex of his life, and you don't want there to be any sort of diminution of his power, so you cut him off then. And I guess another aspect of this too is that there's an aversion. This has to be done at a certain point, or else terrible things will happen to the community. And I was really thinking about the aversion aspect of it. Like, what if this really did happen intentionally? Like, if someone was like, oh, let's consult the Golden Bough because we have unleashed this monster with nuclear weapons, right? This is I don't believe in nuclear weapons, okay? But a lot of people do. And if you do, I remember being a child and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be caught. I mean, Kelly, you grew up the same era as I do. You lived through, I guess, the tail end of the Cold War with me, right? There was all this hysteria about being incinerated by nuclear weapons, and it was like a real fear for me as a small child. It probably gave me a lot of OCD and anxiety. probably still affecting me to this day. Did you have a similar feeling as a child? Like
Absolutely.
anxiety that you couldn't write, like just a constant state of anxiety coming. I mean, and how could you not, right? It's like, oh yeah, we're going to drop a star on you, and everyone's going to be incinerated within like 150 miles of like where it drops. Oh, by the way, go to school. What do you want for lunch? Like, and that's how we had to live.
It's true.
Like,
It's true.
like how could our society not get effed up when you're thinking about the sword of Damocles, like just hovering above your head at all times, right?
Yep.
I don't think we like sat and like had like meltdowns about it all the time, but it was like a persistent anxiety for me as a child. And I always perplexed me that adults weren't visibly concerned about it. Like I just remember like hiding behind the couch and just like losing my mind about thinking everything being incinerated.
Yeah, I mean, the way I grew up, then there was always news on TV all the time, and it was like that was just permeating my reality and having this sort of subconscious layer of fear, really. Fear of this, fear of that, all this could happen, and yeah, so I can relate completely.
Right. So let's say you believe in them and you're like, we have got to do something. This is like a world destroying event. Like mutually assured destruction is not enough because like there were always also as a child too, I always heard these stories about like wild animals. Like if you go and like YouTube, you can look at all these different stories about how close we came to nuclear Armageddon. Right. One time a bear wandered into a facility and almost launched the rockets. And or you think about Strange Love, or you have the Doomsday Machine or something like that. Like these, we think we have these foolproof systems, and something like a wandering animal or like a cracked mad scientist like goes rogue or something like that, right? And it just seemed inevitable that was going to happen. Um, and if you thought so, we need to bring in some heavier fortification. What we need to do is we need to avert this disaster. We need to get this young president in there. We need to uh, in a ritualistic fashion, build him up to be this Christ figure, this Attis figure, this Adonis figure. We need to stage a ritual. We need to harvest that energy. And maybe we can redirect this nuclear holocaust that we have brought upon ourselves and take it to the moon and get it far away from us. Like maybe that was some like great idea that was hatched in the Pentagon somewhere, like they're sitting around the strange love table and be like, has anyone here read the Golden Bough? And they go, no, 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 yes. um I wonder about that. And so that there's this corollary that it was done to prevent a world ending event. Like, and in that way you could kind of see like, maybe this all was justifiable. Maybe all the trauma that we experienced was justifiable if it ended up saving us from a nuclear annihilation. The other way that I think we could possibly think about this aversion theory is, I wonder, I'm someone who believes in the Bible, and that the eschatological framework therein is inevitable. Like I'm not really worried about what's going on in the world today, because ultimately I know in the spiritual struggle who's going to win. But if I was on the wrong side of that equation, I would try to prevent the confrontation and the face-to-face reckoning with God. And I wonder if what we're looking at here is an attempt to delay the inevitable encounter with the divine. And that all this technological buildup, especially when talking about the internet and singularity, is somehow supposed to act in such a way as to like some sort of heat shield or some sort of force field or bubble, prevent that from happening. It's going to happen regardless, but I wonder if all of this is a race against that inevitable scatological fact. I don't know. I do not know, but I'm trying to look at it from the aversion
Mhm.
aspect of it. So I'm calling this aversion theory.
I think you see that playing out with the blacking out is maybe too extreme, but the chemtrailing in the sky to refract. I mean, they are openly saying we should be using weather modification to reduce solar radiation, which you can dress it up as a positive thing, but that is being averse to the sun, which in our little simulation is the archetype for God, for life, that we directly receive downloads from. So that I think is a very tangible example of what you're saying, Luke. I also need to sit with this because looking around, it also seems that there is a huge acceleration. Everywhere I look, all these cults are all about accelerating to the end or to this critical point.
That's true. That's
So
true.
I don't know. Like, I think these things may be compatible. There is seemingly a shielding from divinity, but there's also kind of this race to get the apocalypse going. I don't know how.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the phraseology race. Like we have arms
Mhm.
race and space race and we have all these different races. Like we're racing to what's the hurry? What are we really racing against? Are we racing against Russians or are we racing against God?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or are we
Because I mean, and that's not a crazy idea to talk about. I mean, think about how Promethean the Trinity test was, right? I mean, they named it Trinity. They named it Trinity. Like, hello? Kelly, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, are we racing against something or towards something?
Yeah.
And are they mutually exclusive?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this gets into bigger things too. I mean, I don't want to get into it too much but you know, I mean, we can get into the whole Sabbatean idea of trying to accelerate trying to accelerate the return of the Messiah. It's the idea that God will come faster the more the world gets effed up. So let's accelerate the destruction of the world so as to make God come back sooner. I'm not going to go
Yeah.
deeper
But
into it.
it's such a common theme across tons of different organizations and occult groups.
All right. What do we got? It's a productive conversation. We got 20 minutes left. Okay. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Gali a little bit. I'll try to keep it PG-13 here, but the Gali were this androgynous priesthood in the Sibylle and Attis worship. These eunuch priests in female attire, and during the Hilaria Festival, I mean, you could see them do these street processions. There's lots of music, alms, floral showers, and of course, on the Day of Blood, there's the ritual castration as an imitation of Attis. I guess this idea is that the psychic energy and the blood and everything like that is harvested in such a way as to fuel the regeneration of Cybele and the cycle. And of course, we have the similar rites that go on with Artemis of Ephesus and Astarte of Hierapolis. Yeah, and I guess according to Frazer, the ritual logic is that the goddess must be impregnated by sacrificed male potency. And of course, there was lots of weeping and gnashing of teeth after one unmanned themselves. I guess that is the technical term for this. And I think you can progress to the next slide, Jordan. I don't know if I have much more to say about that because it's all going to be building to a consideration about the counterculture. So he mentions that there are analogs with Artemis of Ephesus and Astarte of Hierapolis. Let me see if I can make this bigger and get my glasses. But we've talked about it in regards to Cybele, but with Artemis of Ephesus, they had a hereditary or appointed high-ranking eunuchs, and they existed to protect the Virgin Mother's purity of the goddess through total subservience, institutional majestic robes, golden crowns, and a third gender diplomatic status. And they were the custodians of that sky stone that we read about in the book of Acts that fell down from Jupiter. It's one of their holy relics. It's just crazy, right? We have moon rocks. They had the sky stone. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. And with the Gali that were part of Astarte, they were voluntary self-castrated eunuchs to mimic the mythological Kambabis and achieve perfection in service. I don't know as much about that. Ecstatic feminine attire, trans feminine identity during Day of Blood rites, aversion of chaos through highly regulated blood debt rituals, reflecting the goddess's otherworldliness in human form. I mean, I guess the natural thing that I didn't really think about it until just now. One has to wonder about, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. You have, I think about with the Virgin Mary, if she is a synchronization of this Artemis of Ephesus, I wonder about the where monks and nuns fit in with all of this, right? Because they're denying their sexuality and being the priest class to the mother goddess in some ways, given the apotheosis of Mary in the Catholic religion. Perhaps it's wrong for me to say that. I'm not trying. I'm just looking at this from a comparative standpoint. Yeah. And then over here we have Astarte, an image of Astarte. So yeah, it just kind of, I'm just kind of showing that these all have a common source. I guess the word for it is an Anatolian source, although I couldn't really tell you what exactly that means, but they all sort of branched out from that. So it may not be correct to say that the one evolved to the other, that they perhaps they descended from a common source is the way to say it. Now I'm interested in what that common thing is. And we might as well just go to the next slide. Thinking about modern analogs of it. I think we talked about it a little bit last time with Ostick. I can't help but think about, as all this Apollinian technological mastery is going on, we have the emergence of the countercultural movement, where you have the Dionysian frenzy. We have the ecstatic drumming and dancing and the association with flowers, which we learned at some point came from Allen Ginsberg. He was the one who developed the idea of flower power, and how it ultimately gets woven together with the technological mastery of outer space when we get the blue marble and the ecological movement that came out of the countercultural movement and all sort of mixed together there in the early 70s, and really was something that was infused into our worldview. Kelly probably watched a lot of Captain Planet at some point with me. Did you watch Captain Planet as a kid, or were you a little older, too old for that? Okay. Yeah, I watched a lot of Captain Planet. I got the environmentalism propaganda. But I think like, how is this happening? Right? Like, none of these people think they're part of Attis and Cybele worship or Adonis and Aphrodite worship. It's not like anyone's getting together and be like, oh, we are the counterculture because we worship this moon goddess or the earth goddess or the mother goddess. None of them are saying that. And I don't know how to make this all compatible, because there seem to be different stratums of explanations to explain what is happening here. I wonder if it's just sort of like a natural correction in society. Like when we have these great technological projects that we're involved in, such as trying to go to the moon, that's overemphasizing the masculine element, right? The abstract, the reasoning, the logical. And so it kind of creates this natural pushback where a third class occurs, where androgyny happens. And, we see a lot of that happening in modern culture. Like there was always an element of transgenderism in American society, very small, but then it exploded. And there are lots of different ways to account for that. But I wonder if it is a response in some ways to the internet and the technological advancements we've made with the merger of the inner and outer space, merger of technology. And an element to this is maybe, as with, a lot of the hippies were traumatized by seeing their young leader, JFK, cut down. I wonder if that allows for the psychic rupture for this recoil to the Apollonian masculinity to occur. And I wonder similarly if there was a psychic rupture that happened with 9/11 that we are still seeing the effects of. Like that, what we're experiencing today with sexuality could somehow be connected back to that psychic rupture. These are just theories. I'm not trying to hate on anybody, not saying your lifestyle is incorrect. But there is something that syncs up with these events.
I hadn't appreciated until I saw this image. This is super obvious, I'm sure, to everyone, but the indigenous influences on the attire of the hippie movement
Oh
is
yeah.
really in your face
Yeah.
here.
Oh yeah. I mean, there was a lot of back to the land movement, right? So there was identification with
Yeah.
Native Americans. So I don't know. Maybe it's wrong to talk about this that way. I mean, this is the crazy thing is like, how are you supposed to talk about the Golden Bough like without applying it to modernity? Am I supposed to just believe that like it's all the magic and religion is gone and we can just be like, thank God we're in a completely scientific and rationalistic era. We are not involved in any sort of modern mythology, gods, goddesses, rites, or rituals. We are so enlightened and so past all that. Meanwhile, like all our outer space stuff is named after gods and goddesses.
Yeah, I think the Enlightenment was a psyop.
Like, what does someone read the Golden Bough and just be like, oh yeah, well, good thing we conquered all that nonsense. Good thing it's not happening to us now at all. Is that like what a respectable person is supposed to conclude?
I feel
Or is it just like until we completely get rid of Christianity, we're not fully out of the religious phase. But then we've transcended it all. And I couldn't possibly be wrapped up in a mythology that I'm unconscious of. Which then, if it is true, if people are unconsciously involved in a mythology that they do not recognize, how do we even know that our assessments of the past are accurate? And we talk about all these, oh, the Gali thought this, like they had to do this Day of Blood thing, and this group did this thing, and the drum meant that. How do we know anything at all? If these people who are at Woodstock are the modern Gali, who were not consciously participating in it at all, how do we know anything about truly those rites and rituals from the past? And what the intention of the participants were.
Yeah, of course.
Kelly, I think I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I don't know what I was going to say. Maybe something like it seems like the progression from the time of the ancient galley and today is that we have shifted from the physical to the symbolic. It's gone from the body, you act everything out with your bodies and other people's bodies as far as the castration and blah blah blah, but now it seems like we are experiencing that psychologically and psychically rather than physically.
Yeah. It's like even when we think we've liberated ourselves from it, it's going to sneak back in. And if that's the case, what do we mean by this stuff sneaking back in? It's like we do become like appendages and vessels. And this gets back to the archetypal emergence theory. But why does the reality need to function this way, that it would use us as conduits to continuously act out these rituals unless it needs us to. That's the craziest thing, right? That maybe the primitives that Frazer and other people are studying actually understood the structure of the simulation in the universe better than we do. That it's going to do this through us unconsciously because it actually needs us to do it.
Yep. Yeah, I always talk about things happening through you, with you, and for you. But maybe there's a bigger thing it's for. I want to add on to your point too, Kelly. You're talking about how it's sort of a watering down or a lowering the intensity of what is required to participate in this archetypal pattern, shifting from pretty traumatic and dramatic physical alterations into fashion choices. I wonder how that impacts things in terms of accessibility. So now, way more people in contemporary culture unwittingly participate in it. Maybe some of them are aware than ever would if it came at a great known conscious physical cost. So as these things enter, just like they laced water with acid, just as things kind of permeate in and become easier to take in a way, it's like how they talk about viruses evolving so that they're weaker, but they spread way more. Maybe the archetypes are like a virus.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's a lot to think about.
It really is. I used to just like autistically info dump on people in real life, and then I realized I was going nowhere with that strategy. So I just like save up all my thoughts and then just put it out here on Sundays. This is like the culmination of like 40 hours of work, it's probably, I don't know, maybe it's more, but it's about 40, I think. One slide and then we are done. And then we have 8 minutes to talk about this last one. So Kelly, would you mind reading this?
Not at all.
I'll preface this by saying, there's more to, there's just more to the Apollo program and the intentions behind it than we understand. So this is what I'm going to have Kelly read here. This is a November 1962 meeting between Kennedy, Webb, and several other top White House and NASA officials. So, yeah.
President Kennedy says we're not going to settle the 400 million this morning. I want to take a look closely at what Dave Bell said, I guess, but I do think we ought to get it, really clear that the policy ought to be that this is the top priority program of the agency. And one of the two things, except for defense, the top priority of the United States government. I think that is the position we ought to take. Now, this may not change anything about that schedule, but at least we ought to be clear. Otherwise, we shouldn't be spending this kind of money because I'm not that interested in space. I think it's good. I think we ought to know about it, and we're ready to spend reasonable amounts of money. But we're talking about these fantastic expenditures, which wreck our budget and all these other domestic programs. And the only justification for it, in my opinion, to do it in this time or fashion is because we hope to beat them and demonstrate that starting behind, as we did by a couple years, by God, we passed them.
Right. So the wrinkle that this adds, I mean, this statement, Kennedy is not that interested in space. Whoa, I never heard that before. I never heard that the man whose legacy is tied to landing on the moon was that he was thinking about retreating from the original objective. You can see I found a lot of this information through a blog post by Dwayne A. Day. This was how Murdering Apollo, John F. Kennedy and the Retreat from the Lunar Goal. at some point in 62, 63, Kennedy started to reconceptualize what they were going to do with the Apollo program. He entertained ideas with it being a joint American and Soviet mission that I think there was even talk about, like, do we really need to do this whole landing thing? Like, he was like, this is an incredible amount of money. I'm not exactly sure what we're doing here, except to send some sort of message. And how, ultimately, then, he gets killed and it gets, we're going to do this. This is the spirit of Kennedy. We're going to carry this all out. But I think it's just interesting to show that Kennedy was starting to be like, what the heck is this? Like, what are we doing? Like, what's happening here? It adds a complicated layer to the narrative. So I don't know if this is really that fascinating at this particular moment to all the different dying and rising God things that we've looked at in terms of today. But it just adds something to our understanding of that
Yeah, I
time.
think it adds credence to this whole compulsion concept. This isn't something that he decided. It's something that the world shaped around him, and he took advantage of what he thought the opportunity was, which I think is even more interesting.
I mean, I think it's a real possibility that had he lived, whether or not we ever would have landed on the moon.
Yeah, that's so true. So much of his legacy is after his departure.
Would we have had the public support in the way if we did not have that catastrophic event that happened in Dallas? Would we have walked it back a little bit or a lot of bit? And what are the implications of that? Like, we've talked about how there was seemingly a need to harvest and to take and transmogrify like the spirit of JFK into the Apollo program. I don't know. It's looking like it wouldn't have happened. If he's talking this way in 62, how's he going to feel in like 67 when like the Apollo 1 incident happens? He'd be like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. This is silly. Okay.
Certainly
Final
interesting.
words. Yeah. I'll let you ladies close it out. We have 2 minutes.
I feel satisfied. This was really fascinating. I enjoyed it a lot.
Kelly, thank you for
Mhm.
joining us at the last minute.
No, it was my pleasure, and I also enjoyed it a lot. And I find every time I either watch an episode or participate in an episode, I just have so much to think about all the time. So I
Mhm.
have a little running list in my mind of things I want to go deeper in, and I'm looking forward to the next time. So thank you very much.
Well, be sure to send me what you find, okay?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for
Bye.
listening. See you next week.